Welcome to the Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs podcast, a place for podcasters to learn what's actually working in the world of podcasting and how to use their podcast to generate consistent leads in their business. I'm your host, Jenny, and I'm so excited you're here.
Hi, Danielle. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the online space.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. Before we hopped on the call, I was mentioning that I listen to your show every week and just offers great insights without spending too much time, which is really awesome. So thanks again for having me. And I got started in the online space as a blogger, a personal finance and travel blogger in 2015. And I transitioned to having a podcast by 2018. And I've grown so much as a content creator, but I think what's most important is that being a blogger informs a lot of the decisions that I make as a podcaster, especially when it comes to the show notes. Also, in addition to having my own personal finance and travel platform, I'm also the founder of Women of Color Podcasters. So I have a community and we have classes every single month. We have meetups and just a great place for us to continue to learn and find support, which I also think is important as a podcaster and a creative.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely important to have a community of other like-minded people in the podcasting space, because I feel like it's kind of like so new. It's not really new, but like it's growing every year and it's like newer. I mean, it's been around, for a while. People used to want to be like, what is this stupid app on my phone? Why can't I delete it? Like, I know that's how I was until I first discovered podcasts in 2015. And that's when I listened to my first one, which was probably everyone's first one, Serial, or most people's first one if they started back in the day. So I love that. And I love your journey. And was your podcast about what your blog is about, or was it okay. And do you still have it?
I do. Okay. I still run my blog and podcast, but I would say most of my focus is on the podcast at this point. But for me, it was just a lot easier to have a podcast that supplements the blog and that is the same brand versus having to start over from scratch with something else.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I started off blogging too, and it wasn't anything like what I'm doing now. But even when I had like my VA/social media management business, I had blog posts about that. But then eventually I was like, I want to do a podcast. Like now I don't do blog posts anymore at all. I just do like show notes that are, on my website. So they're kind of like blog posts, but they're not like just a blog. It's like the podcast episode plus the blog post. So that's kind of what we're talking about today, which is show notes. So I know show notes are really, really a hot topic. People are always wondering, do I need them? Do I like really need them, kind of things? So let's talk about show notes and some of their benefits.
Sure. So the question is, do you need show notes? Yes. You do need show notes. And there is a distinction between the episode description, which you typically find within the podcast players, and the show notes. So when I'm speaking of show notes, I'm talking about a dedicated page on your website that is going to go in depth into what this episode is about. And how I think about it is that the show notes really enrich the audio experience. It allows you to share the resources mentioned in written text. Also a great place to put affiliate links and different products that you have that are relevant to the episode or to your podcast. Another benefit that show notes have is great for discoverability, not only within the podcast players themselves, like Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those podcast players, but also discoverability via search engines like Google or Bing or Yahoo or any other ones. So if you have a website and you have your show notes, you'll start to see that your show notes will start to get ranked in these search engines, and that you may receive some free traffic from people who are just finding you online. So that's a huge benefit to having show notes. And lastly, two more. Lastly is that it really entices potential listeners. if you are skipping out and only putting, let's say, a few words or a couple of sentences, that may not be enough to encourage someone to go ahead and listen and go ahead and invest their time and subscribe. So it's really allowing you to showcase what's in it for the listener in an extended way that's not just audio only.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all those things, especially the searchability and discoverability factor, because I feel like podcast discoverability is not that great right now unless you have show notes. Because like first, even one of my podcasts, I have to type in my name exactly in the search bar on Apple Podcasts for it to come up. If I type in just like podcast manager, that's one of my podcasts, that's not this podcast, but if I just type in podcast manager, like sometimes it'll show up, sometimes it won't. So it's not great. It's not great. The keywords are not quite there yet. So having this additional show notes on your website will help get you discovered by more people, and then they can go listen to your podcast in the app of their choosing. But unfortunately right now it's not that great, especially because I can't even listen to the audio yet. I can only read like your description and the title, and that's pretty much it when it comes to like the keywords and things like that. So I can't, like, search engines don't listen to your audio on podcast players yet. So it's like, hopefully that's a thing in the future. But as of right now, that's not how it works. And yeah, so that's why show notes are really, really crucial in my opinion. Yeah. So when it comes to show notes, do you think there's like a typical structure we should be following when it comes to like writing them out and putting them on our website? And, do you feel like we should be doing like long and short form? And what I mean by that is like the long form would be like the blog post, and the short form would be like the podcast description, essentially.
Right. Yes. So I have a framework that I've been workshopping for the last 4 years. So I'm going to share with you what my structure looks like for my show notes. And this structure has really helped me to get found in search, that discoverability we're talking about. So one of the things I actually see a lot of podcasters doing is embedding their podcast players in the first paragraph. And that first paragraph in blogging, it's reserved for your keywords. So if you're including your HTML code from your podcast hosting platform, you're missing out on a crucial spot to tell the search engines what this episode is about. So your first paragraph, your first slot, I will always say, I recommend, tell us what's in it for the listener. What is this episode about? What are they going to learn in a brief section? And if there are any related keywords, you want to make sure your keywords are included in your first paragraph. Then after the first paragraph, what I like to do is then I will embed my podcast player, because I want people to know this is a podcast. It's not a blog,
right.
Traditional blog. So I embed the podcast player. And then underneath that podcast player, I include some of the places where people can listen to this episode. What's important, for example, if I have Apple Podcast, that link, it's not to my Apple Podcast general, to my show. I want to make sure that link is specific to the episode. Because as you build your archives, you're going to have many, many episodes. And if you're not specifically including the link to that episode, your folks are going to get lost, and they're not most likely going to search, your archive. I have 100 episodes now. Too many to count. So definitely recommend including links to a few podcast players. Look to see which ones are your top performing ones. So mostly maybe it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a few others. So include those links. Something new actually that I'm including as well in that link section is Podlink. So Podlink allows you to create like this universal page that shares your podcast and all these different podcast players in one spot. So instead of, telling them they have to listen to an Apple Podcast, you give them the pod link and then they could pick any of the players that they want. So I really like that tool. So now I'm going and adding that in. So this is important I share this because even though I had a structure, like things like Podlink are new to me. So now I'm adding them in. So just be fluid and open to see how you can continuously improve your show notes. After that, after including the links to the different podcast players, then I recommend, like, in this episode, we will discuss, or you'll uncover, or just give us a brief bullet pointed list of like the hot topics that are in this episode. If you decide to do this section, this could be also a great place to put the timestamps right next to each of those bullet points as well. So folks can know, exactly where to go for a particular topic. Now, moving down, another thing I like to include is resources mentioned. A lot of times on the air, you'll say, hey, head to my show notes. Make sure you go back and put those links in your show notes, as well as your affiliate links as well, or any products or services that you're promoting. And another last thing I want to mention here is include links to other episodes in your archives. This allows your show notes to be sticky, and folks are going to come on into one page and then they can explore other potential ideas as well. So for me, that typically is what it looks like. Now, one of the questions you asked was like, should I really go into the nitty gritty and like add even more text? If you have the time, if let's say you're having an episode that's like 5 tips about XYZ, you can pull out each of those tips or pull out the main topics and expand upon that. I wouldn't say I'm always consistent with that depending on time, but you can absolutely do that. But at the bare minimum, the structure I mentioned is a good starting point for consistency.
Yeah, I think that's a big hang up for a lot of people, because they either do nothing or, they think they have to do everything. They're like, oh, I'm not going to do anything. Or, oh, I feel like obligated to do everything. Right. So I think that's a great happy medium for people who are like, they don't have a ton of extra time on their hands, but they want to make sure it's done properly. When people outsource to me and my agency, we obviously do long form ones with like each point is elaborated on, but obviously most of our listeners here are DIYers. So they are less likely to have time to do that or make time to do that. But yeah, so I think that's a great like happy medium structure.
One thing I wanted to add, if you're the type of podcaster that scripts out your episode, or you have an outline that's elaborated, then use that as a basis for your show notes. That is a great time saver. So use your outline, use whatever scripts that you have and pop them in your show notes. Time saver for sure.
Yep. That's what we end up doing typically for my show, because I script pretty much all of my episodes, not word for word, but I write like key bullet points and stuff. And that's what we use for making my show notes. And one of my team members does it. And she basically she adds a couple things and that's pretty much it. She makes sure to add the links, but it makes it so much easier. So it's not like it's not as daunting. And of course, if your episodes are 5 to 10 minutes, please try and do long form show notes, because that's not that much extra time. But, I understand if you have like a ton of guests in there, like 35, 40 minutes each, I can understand why you wouldn't be able to always do long form. But if it's just you doing quick solo episodes, like please try and do the long form, because you want to make it accessible. Accessibility is really, really crucial, because not everyone wants to listen to a podcast. They prefer reading, and you want to meet your audience where they're at. Even though I am a podcast person, I love podcasts. We help, that's my whole business. We help people with podcasts. I understand accessibility. And I think it's important because not everyone can or wants to listen. There's people who are deaf who probably would like to listen, but they can't. So you just want to meet people where they're at and give them the opportunity to, to work with you, because then you're just shutting people out if you're only letting them see it in one way, on one platform. So. Right.
Another thing I also wanted to mention is I have, like we mentioned before, this structure for my show notes. And let's say I'm time strapped. I don't have that much time to go into each bullet point and do like this extensive write-up. What I might do is I'll let a little time pass and I will go into my Google Analytics, the back end, and I will see, hey, what are my top performing podcast episodes for the month? If an episode is on the list and I look at the show notes, I'm like, I'm getting some traffic and it's kind of looking a little, bare bones here. Then I may dedicate more time to fleshing out some more points and comment and important sections. So you can start off with a template that feels good for you. And then you could use tools like Google Analytics to inform your decisions as to which episodes are the ones that you want to go in and offer more context.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important. And, anytime you even have any extra time in general, like look at your top 5, like top of all time, top 10 of all time, top 15, whatever you have time for, and revamp those and just make those ones the best ones. And then come back to the ones that aren't as frequently listened to, because yeah, those are going to be the ones you want to be like, you're putting your best foot forward, because those are when people are stumbling on more frequently. So I love that. That's a great tip. And, we can use that in all aspects of life, really. So awesome. Is there anything that you think that we shouldn't like include in our show notes? I mean, that's kind of a random broad question, but.
I was thinking about this question and there wasn't anything that stood out to me. However, I think that there are areas that I see that people should do more of. I think a lot more podcasters have very, very slim show notes.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of the text, add in photos of, let's say you're on an interview with you and your guest. Take a quick snapshot, put that photo on in your show notes. Don't be afraid to actually go to YouTube and find a YouTube video of that person on their channel speaking, or another interview that they may find interesting. So I like to think of my show notes as a multimedia document. Doesn't necessarily have to just be a sea of text. So add photos, add videos. Those are very important. Also, if you can, and if you have a Pinterest account, because Pinterest is a great discovery tool, add a few pins that people can select and pin to Pinterest. Very, very important. Again, it offers another visual aspect to that. And then lastly, I see that a lot of podcasters aren't including opt-in to sign up for their newsletter.
Yep.
Right. We have a really difficult time connecting with our audience because we don't have like a comment section.
Yep.
We don't have access to their email addresses. Yep. So we want to just be able to capture folks' contact information when they visit our show notes page. So I don't really see things that they shouldn't do. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I mean, I think I love your point about Pinterest, but I think the thing with Pinterest is you do need to have a little bit more full-bodied show notes when you're utilizing Pinterest, because people traditionally that are coming from Pinterest, they're expecting a blog post. That's like their typical expectation. So when they just see a couple bullet points and a podcast player, that kind of turns them off. Right. So if you are intending to use Pinterest for your podcast, I would say like kind of beef up those show notes, because I think that's their expectation, is they're coming to read some kind of blog post, because a lot of the time you're not framing your pin as like an episode. You can, but those don't perform as well because people are looking for a blog post. So you don't always want to put your headshot and your guest headshot there. You might just want to put like the title or whatever. So make sure those ones are beefed up if you do plan on using Pinterest, because that's what people are coming for. That's what they're expecting. And then if they really like it, then they might hit play and become a listener and, a subscriber and whatnot. But the expectation from them is really, more blog post style. From the get-go.
And this, just jogged my memory about intention. We have a lot of different people that we're targeting with our show notes. Our subscribers, our followers of our shows are coming in probably to get additional information, additional resources. Maybe they're looking for a particular link. That's one subset of people. Then you have people who find you through Google, who have no idea who you are, who have no idea who your podcast is. So you want to make sure that you're enticing them with information as to make it relevant for them to consider subscribing and being a follower. Then if you have pins on Pinterest, now you're catering to another audience who's looking for long form written content as well. So I think it's important to think of your show notes as a multifaceted, like it's not only one type of person who's going to be looking at it. There are multiple types of people who will come and find this and for a piece of document and find this information.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great tip. So what are your thoughts on like transcripts? Like, should we be including it? Should we not? Like, what is the best practice for transcripts?
So they say that transcripts is a best practice because it allows to have more text on the page. However, I also understand that this is very time consuming for us to do as well, because they do have transcript software, and AIs, but sometimes they're just wonky and they're not readable, right?
Right.
So you would still have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and things like that. So I found a happy medium for me is to have the transcripts, but then house them in a widget called Fusebox.
Mm-hmm.
So Fusebox allows it to just kind of be wherever you embed it on the page, and people can expand it to see all of the text.
Yeah, but it's not just like straight up like
just
a conversation,
exactly.
just like so long. Yeah.
Exactly. So I like that. So they say there are benefits, the SEO benefits to having transcripts. But again, I think you have to think about your time constraints. And it may be even more beneficial for you to just pull out the core content to make it just beef up your show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite way to use show notes. I don't put them on my website for any of my podcasts. So we do for some of our clients, others we don't. It depends on, what they prefer. But yeah, for mine, or in all of our clients, really, we just use it to form like all the core points from the episode and have it written versus having to listen. And that really helps really pick out the solid like core points from each episode. So it's not like you're having to sit there and listen to a 40-minute episode. You can like scroll through the transcript and then like hit play if something's like not making sense because the transcript didn't read it properly.
Right.
Because transcripts are great, but if you're interviewing someone who's not like a native English speaker or they have an accent, it can definitely be a little more challenging and not as accurate. I found that Descript is pretty accurate though. I like that one. Otter is okay too, but Otter definitely has some struggles more than Descript I've seen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I actually use Hello Audio. So I actually have like private podcasts through them. Okay. And one of their services is that they just offer free transcripts included in your package. So their service for transcripts is really good. So I can they never get my last name Desir. It's always with a Z. It's not correct.
Hey,
never
close
correct.
Enough.
Close enough, right? Close enough. But I'm really impressed with their service. So I really recommend them.
Do you have a public and a private podcast through them or just private?
So I just have private. I have like 5 so far, 5 and counting. Like I have unlimited. So I'm just so nerdy about private podcasts.
And do you have a public one too?
No, I don't have a public one right now.
No public. Did you used to have a public podcast?
Oh, I do. My personal, yes,
okay,
I do have a personal podcast. Yes,
okay,
I do.
So you have 5 privates and like 1 public.
Yes, exactly.
Not
another. Yes,
yeah,
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
I have like I'm turning all my courses into private podcasts
on
Hello Audio, and like my summits as well. And so and then I might do like a little like private podcast for my membership and stuff like that soon. So so I think that's kind of a fun idea is, if you're interested, I'll put Hello Audio's link in the description because it's great. If you want to do a private, they have a public, like on each plan, you can have a
public one. Yeah.
Too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I haven't used it for public because I've used like Libsyn or Buzzsprout or whatever, but definitely a cool option. So yeah, I love that. I think that's really helpful. Any other final like tips that you can think of for creating show notes, like, and making the process easy and not feeling overwhelmed by it?
Sure. So another question someone might have is like, should I include timestamps in my show notes? And it's one of those things I think that if you have the time, great. If you don't have the time, I say, just skip it. But the benefits of having the timestamps is just being able to pinpoint and laser focus for your listeners to know exactly where you spoke about something, a particular topic. Now, I'm not sure if when you're on YouTube, I find timestamps super beneficial. Okay, skip to all the, all this stuff. But I'm not sure about podcasts. So yeah, I think if you have the time, yeah, sure, do it. I have found that when I'm working with sponsors, things like timestamps, they really want that. Things like transcripts, they're very excited about having transcripts as well. Yeah. So be mindful about those things.
Yeah. Yep. And if you're already pulling the transcripts, like if you're just pulling it and you're not putting it on your website, you can grab the timestamps easily from that too, because it'll literally say like each time you talk, it'll tell your timestamp. Right. So definitely makes it a lot easier. So yeah. And lastly, I always like to wrap up, since this is a podcast about podcasting. What is your favorite podcast or podcasts if you have multiple?
Oh, I have so many, so many. All right. So I'll start with one of my favorites. It's the Freelance Friday podcast with Latasha James. And Latasha just talks a lot about what it's like to be a freelancer and running her own business, which is very, very exciting. So that's one of the ones I listen to a lot. Let me pull out my phone to see any other. There's just so many
good ones. Yep.
So many good ones. Another one that I've been listening to is the Monetized Mom Podcast. So that just offers just ways to make money as a mom, and I'm a new mom. So that's been very, very helpful. I love your show. So I listen to you every week for just that inspiration and just like, am I on the right track? I am. Okay, good. So those are some of my favorites for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I think it's like the good thing about podcasting is like I feel like my list is ever changing. Like I'm always going to have like some true crime because that's my thing. I'm always going to have some businessy ones, but like right now I'm in a season of like learning about, I've been a mom for 2 years now, but we're getting into like the toddler phase. So I'm looking for like podcasts that are about, combating big feelings with your toddlers and things like that. And there's something for everyone, which is so amazing. It's just, podcasts are so great because there's such a sea of stuff, just like with blogs. There's a sea of parenting blogs and, meet you where you're at type situations, but it's so much easier to listen on the go versus sitting down and pulling out my phone and trying to read, or pulling out my computer and trying to read. Like I can listen to a podcast when I'm doing pretty much anything versus like, if I'm like reading something, I feel like I have to be fully engaged,
focused, engaged, right?
Yeah. So podcasts are definitely a great medium for busy moms for sure. So yeah, I love that. Well, tell us where we can find you online, and I will make sure to link everything in the show notes as well.
Yes. The best way to connect with me is at DanielleDesir.com, and check out my podcast, the Thought Card Podcast, an affordable travel and personal finance podcast. And Jenny, I will have in the show notes for you.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher.
Hopefully that'll be a great resource.
Yeah.
You can find us at savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and on Facebook at Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs and Instagram at Savvy Podcasting.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Make sure to join our free Facebook community for podcasters by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/community and join in on the exclusive community just for Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs listeners. I'll see you there.